What's the best vibe coding tool to use in 2026? Because every tool claims it'll take you from idea to product, and there are some amazing vibe coding tools out there like Emergent, Lovable, Bolt, Replit, and Base44. So I thought I'd put them all to the test by building the same startup idea I sold in 2022 for $30,000. Pretty cool, right? It was a tool that helps me write blogs similar to Grammarly, but it was powered by an early version of OpenAI's model way before ChatGPT was even released. You can actually check out my entire video of its creation just up here. For this, I actually built it way before vibe coding was even a thing. And this startup idea took me a whole month to build. It required a lot of developer experience in things like databases, authentications, APIs, and much more. But the landscape for building startup ideas has changed a lot in just a few years. Now, anybody can build their own ideas on these new platforms with little to no coding knowledge, since you more or less just have to prompt with an AI. And that's what I want to test. There's a few criteria I want to compare against for all these vibe coding tools. First is speed. How quickly can I jump into a platform and give it an idea and for it to come back with something useful? Second is design. Does it actually create something that looks clean, modern? And is it something that is usable, or does it feel like a generic AI template? Third is functionality. Does the application actually do what I want? Does it work as intended? Can users log in, create articles, save their work? Can they use their editor and move through the product like a real SaaS? Fourth is production readiness and ownership. This one's a big thing because I want it to be able to properly authenticate users, have a real database with payments. I want to be able to deploy it properly, and as well for it to be something I own so I can download and take away with me if I want to. Because a lot of these tools are making these demos that you can't really take away or turn into usable products. Fifth is scalability. How easy is it for me to continue building on this product after the first draft? Can I hand it to a developer or push that code to GitHub or even sell it on a marketplace? And finally, time. Each platform will get around 10 minutes to build as much of the product as possible. If you can do it faster, then it gets extra points. But one prompt will be used across every platform. Here's the prompt I'll use. Create a SaaS startup that allows people to create written blog articles. The first platform I'm testing is Emergent. It's one of the first because on paper, it's probably the closest to what I personally think a vibe coding tool should look like in 2026. It's also not just a tool to create simple front ends or prototypes, but something that'll actually help me build an idea into a working SaaS. Emergent launched in 2025. It's one of the newer platforms in the space, which means that it was around with the latest wave of AI app building workflows from the very beginning. This actually gives it access to some really cool things, which I want to take a look at. First, it has multi-agents. This allows Emergent to spin up a team of agents that work in parallel. Things like a planner, a front-end and back-end engineer, database testing engineers, deployment agents, and much more. And they're all running at the same time, allowing outputs to be a lot faster. It also has a backend from day one. So unlike things like Lovable or Base44, where you need to wire up things like Supabase or bring your own backend, Emergent gives that access to you straight away with a backend, API routes, database, authentication, all built in from the very first prompt. It has authentication and payments built in, especially for things like SaaSes. This makes things like adding a subscription fee for something like $19 a month for new users through Stripe a lot easier. So that billing logic and webhooks are all kind of in there. It has a universal key for AI. So this is where, like, if you want to use something like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini all at the same time, you don't need to juggle 3 API keys. You can just create this one universal key through Emergent and utilize all of them, which is a lot more secure too. You can also deploy directly through GitHub. So as soon as the project's finished, I can publish it on a URL with an SSL certificate, and all of that is synced into GitHub. It has self-healing, which kind of is where it looks at your code and progressively fixes it over time, which is cool, though I want to test out how that works in the long run. And finally, it has mobile support, which means that later on, if I want to build an app for my startup, then I can do so through something like React and Expo, and I don't have to build a whole new project since it's not rebuilding it from scratch, it's using the code I already have in there. Without further ado, let's actually jump in and see what it's like. Here's the landing page for Emergent. I'm going to start off on a full stack app, and I'm going to throw in this giant prompt that I prepared earlier to recreate Enhance AI. I'm going to be using the Claude 4.7 instance, and I'm going to kick this off with the default agent. The first thing the agent does is actually ask a few clarifying questions about what you want the project to do specifically. The first question is, what should we use for the autocomplete? In this case, I want to use Emergent's universal LLM key rather than manually putting in keys for things like Gemini or OpenAI. For authentication, instead of JWTs, I want to use Google social login, so I'll select to use that. Finally, here we can do our Stripe integration. I do want Stripe, so I'm going to select that and copy the keys in later on. I'll confirm the pricing tiers. In this case, I just want free and pro without any teams. The final question here is what kind of additional features I might want. I like the idea of having a word count and a reading timer on the blog post because it's something I had earlier before. Other than that, I think that should be more or less everything we need to kick off this agent to start building this app. For this next part, the agent runs in the background, and I'm going to run this at around 30 times speed. Once complete, it takes around 7 minutes for the agent to fully create the dashboard and app. Here's the homepage with a design that is minimalistic, but also using the color scheme that I requested. It's nice and clear with some examples of the features, the pricing plan, and a quick call to action in blue to start writing for free. Clicking through takes me through the Google sign-in. That actually works perfectly. Then here is my main dashboard. I can select to create a new article. This takes me to the blog writer. The layout of this is clean and simple, exactly what I asked for, and here I can see that the autocomplete is also working. You can see the AI in the background suggesting me next lines and paragraphs to autocomplete as I'm typing. If I select back and create new articles, then they're all saved here into a database under my account, so everything's connected to that DB. I can also upgrade my plan to a paid plan using Stripe, and this is all working as well with hooks too. Here's the tier list I put together. Here I have design, speed, functionality, product readiness, and scalability. On the right hand side, I'll drag in each one of the vibe coding apps and reposition them based on their rating in this tier list. Right now, we'll just start off with Emergent, but I'll drag in and rearrange the others once we get to them. Now, let's take a look at Base44. They were launched in 2025 and also acquired by Wix in the same year. Much like Wix, they try to provide one platform for pretty much everything. From your front end to back end, your database and authentication, they all kind of sit in one system. They also have several plans, starting from something like $16 a month, all the way up to $160 a month. Let's jump in and test them out. On Google, I'm going to search up Base44, scroll down a little to the very first result that's not an ad, and there it is. It doesn't have a favorite icon, which is odd, but let's actually have a look. Here, it's a nice clear homepage. I can paste in my prompt and let's give it a shot. Before I can run it though, I do need to log in, so let me do that just now. This takes me back to the homepage and kicks off the prompt here to create that SaaS startup. The agent that's running this on Base44 kicked it off without asking me any additional questions, but it does seem to be running pretty quickly and finishes off at around the 3 to 4 minute mark. Let's take a closer look. So the homepage is nice and clear, very similar to our previous one, using a lot of that Tailwind CSS design structure and color. Next, I want to try and log in. Selecting to kick that off, it takes me to a Google sign-in. Let me select to click and test that out. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work. I think maybe it's because we're in an iframe, so let me actually open this up in a full screen and test it out one more time. Doing this in full screen did seem to work. Now I'm here in the dashboard. It looks alright, it has some example articles which are saved to a database, but here the actual editor itself is very subpar. There are some icons which aren't correctly sized. The text itself is just one giant text input rather than it being styled, and the suggestions themselves are hidden below, so I actually have to manually select a suggestion for AI and then manually accept to approve it. It's not as good as the tab version we had in the Emergent one, but it does save it to a database. Upgrading to a pro plan doesn't actually work either. It doesn't connect to Stripe and it just kicks me out of the system, asking me to log back in, which isn't great either. So there are a few bugs to be aware of. Some more tidbits to know about Base44 is that if you do want to copy out the code, you do need to upgrade to a paid plan. You don't have access to that, although publishing does seem to be pretty easy. So in terms of the tier list, I think Base44 has a slightly worse design, especially in the dashboards, than Emergent. The speed was a lot faster, though the results weren't great in comparison because its functionality, well, it didn't really work when I did things like the subscription, and even the design of the app in terms of product readiness wasn't great. It wasn't that easy to pull out the code, and I question its scalability in the long run. It's been a while since I've checked out bolt.new, so now it's time to see how they've progressed in the meantime since the last video I did with them about a year ago. Let's find them. On Google, I'll search up bolt.new. Here they are at the very top, and their website looks pretty much the same as it did a few years ago when I used them. I can enter in my prompt just over here, so let's paste that prompt in and select build now. I'll still need to sign in before I can do anything. However, once done, it immediately kicks off the prompt. Let's see how long Bolt takes in comparison to the others. It hasn't asked me any follow-up questions, it's just gotten straight into the task. And 4 minutes in, it says it's both done, but also run into a permission issue with its own toolset here for its database, which isn't great. Let's actually take a closer look at the code and what it's produced, because right now nothing's showing up. If I have a look at the code, it's an empty project. There's nothing in here. So it's actually failed at the very first prompt request here. I'm going to give it one more shot and see if it can maybe put something together, because it did do a lot of thinking, even though it hasn't actually produced anything. This time, bolt.new spent about another 5 or 6 minutes working on the project, and it did in fact put something together. So let's take a closer look at what it created. And here's the design that bolt.new put together. It's also nice and simple, kind of how I requested, but it's almost too simple and doesn't really stand out in comparison to the last two designs we've seen from Emergent and Base44. I do get access to the code immediately and a nice button here for things like the database, so let's test out if that actually works when we're using the app. One thing I've noticed is that it's just a regular login. This is not a Google sign-in, which is a lot simpler, I guess, on the database, but I would prefer a Google login since that actually makes the project a lot more accessible for new users. It also doesn't work. This database fails to save new users, so in terms of both the login and functionality, we're already failing here. I'm actually going to see if I can get it to manually create a new user using prompting and inject it straight into the database, because right now I can't even log into the dashboard. So I've created the user in the database, but I still can't log in. It looks like something with the schema of the database still isn't working, so I'm doing some additional troubleshooting to hopefully fix it. Alright, I finally got in. The dashboard itself seems to work okay. The layout for the editor is nice with tab completion and auto detect when I'm typing. It's also saving documents to a database, but it doesn't allow me to upgrade to a paid plan since it doesn't actually have any Stripe integration. So let's take a closer look at where it lands in our tier list. In terms of design, I think it had a worse design on the homepage, but a better design for the editor. So I'm actually going to put it above Base44. In terms of speed, it did seem fast at the start, but it failed, and it took a number of times before it worked. So it's the lowest in speed. In terms of functionality, I'd also put it at the lowest because it failed to even allow me to log in or access the database, and it failed to originally start. Because of this, I'll also put its product readiness a little bit down at the bottom and its scalability somewhere in the middle, because I do like the fact that you have an editor in here with all the code and you can edit this in real time whenever you want. Lovable is one of the oldest platforms out there, which means it's 2 years old. Launched in 2024, it's also one of the very first platforms I tested. I'm really interested to see how it's changed since the last video I did on them. Right now, their pricing is around $25 per month or $50 per month, but be aware that this does not count credit usage or tokens, because that can quickly double your bill if you increase it, making it go from 50 to 100 and 200 and so on. So just be aware. Anyway, let's jump in and test them out. Once again, starting here on Google, I'm just going to search up Lovable, scroll down and head to the first link here for Lovable AI. I do like the color scheme for their landing page, and the first thing we're going to do is throw in the prompt and select to build immediately. As always, it'll be a request here to log into Google, so let me do that now, and this should sign me into my account from a few years ago. This takes me to the dashboard. I will have to manually re-click here to build this application. It's not taking me straight to the app builder like some of the other ones, but once it does, it takes me into this chat dialog here where it's reviewing my request and actually asking me a few follow-up questions, which I like to see. From here, the agent takes over. It starts building it in the background. It actually comes in at a little bit just over 7 minutes, creating the database, creating all the files and the structure before giving me this final page right over here. I'm pretty impressed with the landing page. It looks a lot more well designed compared to some of the previous examples I've seen. Creating an account and signing in is just a regular username and password that you manually enter in. I still prefer the Google sign-in options when they're created. Once signed in, I get to this dashboard just over here, and here's the editor for the blogs themselves. It's very minimalistic without anything else, and it does have this auto suggest here with a tab to complete, and overall the design reminds me a lot of Grammarly. However, it does work as intended, and that's the main thing. Heading back to the dashboard, it is saving the pages and content that we're creating, which is great to see. Next, if I head to pricing and select upgrade to Pro, this feature doesn't yet work. It says that I would need to integrate Stripe checkout, which is coming soon, and it'll probably require me to do additional prompting, but overall this isn't too bad. So let's take a look at where we would put Lovable on this tier list. In terms of design, I think it did a pretty good job, much better than Base44 and bolt.new, though I do prefer the editor Emergent created for the actual functionality of the app itself. Next, if we take a look at the speed, it was technically the slowest at 7 to 8 minutes, but bolt.new took 2 lots of 5 minutes, so I'm going to put it here in last place and put Lovable above it. In terms of functionality, everything worked from the get-go. We could log in, we could save items, and we could use the AI to autocomplete, so it's going to be better than Base44 and bolt.new, but Emergent did better overall with things like Stripe working as well. Because of that, I'll also put it here in second place in terms of product readiness. Finally, for scalability, I'll put it here in second place, because everything it built did work, but it didn't go above and beyond like Emergent did. Next up is Replit. Let's check them out. On Google, I'll also chop a Replit and click the first link here, and I remember they just came up with an app builder that lets you build apps in React Native, because I did a video with them the other month. I'll be interested to see how they go with this large prompt to build this app SaaS, and as usual, I'm gonna need to log into Google to kick off this prompt. Compared to the others, this one took the longest. It actually went all the way up to 11 minutes. I think this is an example of how you're not using parallel agents properly. Like for example, Emergent that had design, front-end and back-end agents running at the same time. This one feels like it's just one agent progressively trying to spit out one giant app that's monolithic, and it's just taking a longer time. Here's the design for the front end. It's probably the smallest and simplest design from all the examples so far, though I do appreciate the option to sign in with Google for the app itself. The design of the dashboard looks a little bit better, and the visual editor also looks much better too. It almost feels like I'm working inside of Microsoft Word. This editor is probably the nicest in terms of design. There's only one issue, which is that the actual AI completion itself doesn't work. I also tested to see if this saves to a database. It does, and it also lets me select to upgrade to a paid plan, but if I do select that, nothing actually happens, and it just kind of says that it did the upgrade without really taking me to Stripe or anything like that. So how does it stack up on our tier list? So in terms of design, I'd say Replit just comes in above Bolt and Base44, though I think it sits below Lovable because I didn't really like the homepage it created. In terms of speed, it was the slowest, so I'm going to put it here in last place. In terms of functionality, it also didn't work, so I'm going to put it above bolt.new because we could log in, but the AI functionality of the core app didn't function. In terms of product readiness, I'll probably put it again above bolt.new, but below Base44. And finally, in terms of scalability, I think we could probably get it up and running better than what we did here in Bolt and Base44. I'm just going to put it here in middle place. And finally, we have V0, something built by Vercel to originally help you create UI components. It's come a long way. Let's see where it's at now. Heading over here to Google, I can search up V0 and just head to this link here, which is V0 by Vercel. It's a simple website, so I'm just going to paste in the prompt. And something different compared to every other vibe coding tool so far is that this one can be kicked off without having to log in. Very bizarre, but I actually like it. Similar to Lovable and Emergent, it asks me a few follow-up questions of how I want the app to actually work, which I also appreciate as well. It's only now that I've finally kicked things off that it's asking me to sign in. As the process kicks off, it asks me to connect up to my Stripe and Supabase through these two buttons, which is a lot easier than having to manually copy over API keys or private keys and things like that. This whole process ends up taking around 8 to 9 minutes, probably one of the longest, so I'm expecting a lot. And here's the final design for the homepage. This personally I don't think is the greatest. It looks like a very basic page without really much of a nice font, because this font doesn't feel like it's made for writing. I would almost say this looks like it was created by a student. Here for the login, it asks me to put in a username, password, and it then gets me to confirm with an email to log in. However, it didn't really work. Like with bolt.new, I actually requested it to manually enter in a user account into the database through prompting, and hopefully that'll let me get into the dashboard to at least test if this application works. I finally managed to get in, and unfortunately the dashboard as well as the editor look really basic, and they don't even function as intended since there is no AI capabilities built into this. It does say that I do need to upgrade to a paid plan in order to actually unlock these, so let's see if that actually works. I'm going to select here to upgrade to Pro. Upgrading the plan doesn't really work, it just kicks me back to being logged out and back to the homepage. So this really isn't the best outcome out of all the examples we've had so far. So let's see where it stands on our tier list. It was definitely last in terms of design, both for the front end as well as the internal dashboard. It was also one of the slowest. It was actually a little bit faster than Replit, but I'm not going to say that it did a good job there either. Functionality, well, it didn't really work on any front because it even failed to log me in. So I'm also going to put it last for product readiness and scalability. I really expected something more from Vercel here, but maybe V0 is mainly for UI components. With this tier list done, it's clear that the winner here is Emergent. They did well against every metric besides maybe speed, where they were on par with Lovable. And on top of that, they actually produced the app I was looking for from the get-go in a single prompt. Not only did they have the authentication, but they also had the billing and the functionality that I needed in order to get it up and running. If you're a developer or a non-technical founder, then this is something that you should definitely try. Second place was Lovable, and I'm not surprised here either. Lovable have always been known for this sort of thing, and it's why there's so many people investing into them as a company. Finally, I was really surprised to see bolt.new and v.0 do so poorly. I expected a lot more from them, especially since they've been up and running for a while and they have large backing. Replit, I would say, has room for improvement. They've constantly been working on their tools and adding new features, but I still think that a lot more work has to be done on their agents in order to get them up to par with companies like Emergent. Finally, I want to give a big thanks to Emergent. I actually reached out to them when I found out this result, and they were kind enough to sponsor this video and make it happen. If you want to learn more about them, then definitely check out the link in the description below.